Margaret Callahan's knees hit the courthouse floor before she could stop them. Not from grief, not from prayer. From the weight of a judge's voice telling her she was no longer the owner of her own land. She was 26, widowed, and standing in a room full of men who'd already decided her future. Then the courthouse door slammed open, and the most dangerous man in Wyoming Territory walked in to marry her. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew his reputation. And God help her, she knew she had no other choice. If this story grips your heart, subscribe to our channel and follow Margaret's journey to the very end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The courtroom smelled like sweat and tobacco, and something worse. Something that clung to the walls of every room where men decided what happened to women. Margaret Callahan stood at the front, her fingers locked together so tight her knuckles had gone white 10 minutes ago. She hadn't loosened them since. Couldn't. Because if she let go, her hands would shake. And if her hands shook, every man in this room would see it. And she'd die before she gave them that. Judge Hawthorne didn't look at her when he spoke. He looked at the papers. Always the papers. As if the law lived on those pages and not in the woman standing 3 feet from his bench. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, "the Territorial Property Statute of 1874 is clear. A woman cannot hold deed to land exceeding 40 acres without the legal authority of a male guardian, husband, or appointed custodian." "I know what the statute says," Margaret said. Her voice didn't waver. She'd practiced that. Practiced it in front of the mirror at 4 in the morning while the house was still dark, and her dead husband's boots still sat by the door where he'd left them 6 months ago. "Then you understand. I understand that my husband died protecting this town, Judge. I understand that he was sheriff for 9 years. I understand that the land you're discussing was bought with money he earned and I managed. So yes, sir, I understand the statute. I just don't understand why it applies to a woman who built half of what this town stands on." Silence. Not the respectful kind. The kind that happens when a woman speaks too long in a room where she wasn't supposed to speak at all. Judge Hawthorne removed his spectacles, cleaned them, put them back. "The law doesn't make exceptions for sentiment, Mrs. Callahan." From the back pew, a chair creaked. Victor Crowley uncrossed his legs. He didn't stand, didn't need to. Every man in Red Hollow knew when Victor Crowley shifted his weight, the ground shifted with him. "If I may, Your Honor," Crowley said, and his voice was the kind of smooth that made Margaret's stomach turn, the voice of a man who'd already won and wanted everyone to watch him collect. "The Callahan property sits on 412 acres of prime grazing land, adjacent to the proposed rail corridor. Mrs. Callahan, God bless her, has no foreman, no hands worth keeping, and no legal standing to retain the deed." He paused, smiled, not at Margaret, at the judge. "I've made a fair offer. Twice." Margaret turned to face him. "You offered me 12 cents an acre, Mr. Crowley, for land worth $3. That's not fair. That's theft with a handshake." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Crowley's smile didn't flinch. "I also offered you a position in my household. Housekeeper. Comfortable. Respectable. You offered me a cage with curtains. I offered you survival, Mrs. Callahan. And I told you no." The murmur grew. Judge Hawthorne banged his gavel once, and the room obeyed. "Enough," the judge said. "Mrs. Callahan, the court will give you 14 days to present a male legal custodian for the property. If you cannot, she won't need 14 days." Every head turned. The courthouse door had opened without anyone hearing it. That alone should have been the first warning. Big doors don't open quiet unless the man opening them knows how to move without sound. Luke Mercer stood in the doorframe. He was tall, not the kind of tall that announced itself, the kind that simply filled the space it entered and dared anyone to challenge it. His hat was pulled low, shadow cutting across a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in days. His shirt was dust-stained, his boots worn nearly through at the heels. But it was his eyes that stopped the room. Cold, not angry, not threatening, just empty. The way a man's eyes go when he's seen enough to stop reacting to what he sees. Margaret had never met him, but she knew the name before anyone said it, because every woman in Wyoming Territory knew that name. "Luke Mercer," someone whispered. "The butcher. Lord have mercy." Crowley's smile finally cracked, just a fraction, but Margaret saw it. Luke walked down the center aisle. His boots didn't hurry, didn't hesitate. Each step landed like a sentence with a period. He stopped 3 feet from the judge's bench, didn't remove his hat. "Your Honor," he said, and his voice was low, rough, the texture of a road no one wanted to travel. "I'm here to marry Mrs. Callahan." The courtroom erupted. Margaret felt the floor tilt beneath her. She grabbed the edge of the witness rail and held. "You," she started. "Don't know me," Luke said. He still didn't look at her. "I know." Judge Hawthorne leaned forward. "Mr. Mercer, you have a reputation that precedes you by several hundred miles. 3 men dead in Silver Creek, a bounty on your head in 2 territories. You expect this court to—" "The bounty was cleared. Check your records." Luke pulled a folded paper from inside his coat and placed it on the bench. "Pardon from the territorial governor, signed and sealed. I served as a scout during the war and was contracted by the U.S. Marshals for 4 years after. Every man I killed was holding a weapon." He paused. "Every one." The judge opened the paper, read it again. Crowley was on his feet now. "This is absurd. You can't allow—" "I'm a free man with legal standing," Luke said. He still hadn't raised his voice. "I'm offering to take legal guardianship of the Callahan land through marriage. The statute allows it." "The statute doesn't require her to accept a murderer," Crowley spat. "It doesn't require her to accept a thief either," Luke said. "And yet here you are." Dead silence. Margaret watched Crowley's face turn from red to white. She'd never seen that happen before. Not once. Judge Hawthorne set down the paper. "Mrs. Callahan," he said slowly, "this is unprecedented. But the law is the law. Mr. Mercer's documents appear legitimate. If you consent to this marriage, the property remains under joint guardianship." Margaret's throat closed. She looked at Luke Mercer, at the scar that ran from his left ear to his jawline, at the hands that had killed men, at the shoulders that carried something she couldn't name, something heavy and permanent and older than his years. He looked back, and for the first time since he'd walked in, he spoke directly to her. "I ain't asking you to trust me, ma'am. I'm asking you to let me help you keep what's yours." "Why?" she said. "Why would you do this?" Something shifted behind his eyes, something fast and painful that disappeared before she could name it. "Because your husband asked me to." Margaret felt the air leave the room. "Daniel, before he died, he sent me a letter, said if anything happened to him, I was to look after you and the land." "I never saw any letter." "No, ma'am, you wouldn't have. He didn't want you to know he thought he might not come home." Margaret pressed her hand flat against her stomach, breathed. The room waited. Victor Crowley's voice cut through like a blade. "This is theater. A criminal and a widow playing house. The court shouldn't— The court, Margaret said, didn't ask your opinion, Mr. Crowley. She looked at the judge. I consent. The wedding happened 20 minutes later. No flowers, no music, no guests who wanted to be there. Just the judge, a Bible, and a courthouse that smelled like old wood and older regret. Margaret said, I do, the way a person signs a contract, with precision, not feeling. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were dry. Luke said, I do, the way a man swears an oath he intends to keep. When the judge said, you may kiss the bride, Luke didn't move. Margaret didn't either. The judge cleared his throat. A handshake will suffice, Margaret said. Luke extended his hand. She took it. His palm was rough, calloused. A hand that had worked and fought and held things it probably wished it hadn't. Mrs. Mercer, the judge said. Callahan, Margaret corrected. I'll keep my name for the ranch. The judge made a note. Nobody argued. Outside, the sun was punishing. July in Red Hollow didn't forgive. It pressed down on you like a boot on a neck, and it didn't let up until September. Margaret walked to the wagon. Luke walked beside her. Not close. 3 feet of deliberate distance. I'll ride behind, he said. My horse is tied at the livery. Fine. I'll sleep in the barn. She stopped, turned. You'll sleep in the bunkhouse. There's a cot. The barn's for animals. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. She climbed into the wagon, took the reins, didn't wait for him. The road to the Callahan ranch stretched 5 miles through open prairie, and Margaret drove every inch of it with her jaw clenched and her hands steady and the question burning in her chest like a coal she couldn't spit out. What kind of man agrees to marry a stranger because a dead man asked him to? She didn't know yet, but she was going to find out. The first 3 days were silence. Not awkward silence, deliberate silence. The kind that 2 people build like a wall between them, brick by brick, because the alternative, talking, might crack something neither of them was ready to break open. Luke worked. He started before dawn and didn't stop until dark. He fixed the fence posts Crowley's men had kicked over. He dug out the irrigation ditch that had silted up since Daniel died. He rehung the barn door that had been hanging crooked for months. He never asked permission, never announced what he was doing. Margaret would wake up, walk outside, and something would be fixed. On the 3rd morning, she found him at the well, shirtless, hauling up water. She saw the scars. Not 1, not 5. A map of violence written across his back in raised, pale lines, some thin, some thick, some layered over each other like someone had returned to the same place again and again. Whip marks. She made a sound. Something involuntary, something between a breath and a word, and he turned fast, instinct, not surprise. And his eyes found hers, and she saw it. Shame. Not guilt. Shame. The kind a man carries when someone sees the thing he's tried to bury. He reached for his shirt. Don't, she said. He froze. I mean, she stopped, started again. I just mean you don't have to hide from me. Whatever those are, they're not something you should be ashamed of. He pulled the shirt on anyway, buttoned it to the throat. With respect, ma'am, you don't know what they are. Then tell me. He picked up the water bucket, carried it past her toward the trough. Not yet, he said. And that was the last they spoke that day. On the 5th night, Margaret couldn't sleep. The heat was unbearable. The house held it like a fist. She sat on the porch with a glass of water that was warm before she'd taken 3 sips, and she watched the dark. Footsteps. Luke came around the corner of the house. He'd been walking the perimeter. She'd noticed that. He walked the fence line every night, checking for broken wire, for tracks, for anything that shouldn't be there. He saw her and stopped. "Ma'am, didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't. Sit down." He hesitated, then sat on the far end of the porch steps, 4 feet between them. Margaret sipped her water, set the glass down. "My husband never mentioned you," she said. "Not once. In 9 years of marriage, Daniel never said the name Luke Mercer." "He wouldn't have." "Why?" Luke took his hat off, set it on his knee. His hair was dark, matted with dust and sweat. "Because I'm the kind of man a good husband doesn't bring up to his wife." "Meaning?" "Meaning I did things for the Marshalls that don't make for dinner conversation." "Did you do them for Daniel?" Silence. "I tracked a man once. A man who'd killed a rancher's family outside Laramie. Father, mother, 2 boys. Daniel couldn't cross territorial lines to pursue, so he sent me." "And you caught him?" "I caught him." Margaret waited. "And?" "He didn't come back alive." She let that sit, let it breathe in the hot night air. "The men in Silver Creek," she said. "The 3 men they call you a butcher for." "They were slavers, running women across the border. 2 of them drew on me. The 3rd I disarmed. He came at me with a knife." He paused. "I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't hesitate either." "Should you have?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. Not the quick glances he'd been rationing since the courthouse, but a full, unguarded look. "No, ma'am, I shouldn't have." Margaret nodded slowly. "Daniel chose you for a reason." "Maybe." "No, he chose you because he knew what I'd be up against." She turned to face him. "Victor Crowley isn't going to stop because I signed a marriage certificate, is he?" Luke put his hat back on. "No, ma'am, he ain't." "Then what happens next?" "He pushes harder, tries to break you, break the ranch, break the marriage. He wants you desperate enough to sell." "And if I won't?" Luke stood, looked out at the dark prairie. "Then he'll try something worse." Margaret stood too. "Then I need to know something, Luke Mercer." He waited. "When that happens, when it gets worse, are you going to fight for this land? Or are you going to disappear like every other man who's ever made a promise he couldn't keep?" He turned, met her eyes. "I don't break promises, ma'am. That's the one thing they got wrong about me." "What's the one thing they got right?" "A beat. 2. That I'm dangerous." He stepped off the porch, walked into the dark. Margaret watched him go, and for the first time since Daniel died, she felt something she didn't have a word for. Not hope, not trust, not safety, but something closer to the feeling you get when you've been drowning so long you forgot what air tasted like. And then something, someone, reaches down and pulls your head above the surface. Just for a second. Just long enough to breathe. She went inside, locked the door out of habit, not fear. And somewhere in the bunkhouse, a man who the world had called a butcher lay awake in the dark, pressing his hand against the letter in his coat pocket. The letter from a dead sheriff that read, "If I don't come back, look after Maggie. She's the strongest woman I've ever known. But the wolves will come. They always do. And she'll need someone who knows how to fight them." Luke folded the letter, closed his eyes. The wolves were already here. The wolves came on the 7th morning. Margaret found the first dead calf at the edge of the south pasture. Its belly was split open, not by teeth, by a blade. Clean, deliberate. The kind of cut a man makes when he wants to send a message, not when he's hungry. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stood there in the early heat, flies already gathering, and she felt something cold and hard settle into her chest, like a stone dropped into deep water. Luke was beside her before she heard him coming. He crouched down, touched the cut, rubbed the blood between his fingers. "Knife," he said. "Done last night, between midnight and 3. "How do you know?" "Blood's dried, but not black. Flies haven't laid yet." He stood, wiped his hand on his jeans. "This ain't coyotes, ma'am." "I know what it ain't." He looked at her. She saw something shift in his face. Not pity, not fear, but the kind of recognition that happens when one person sees another person refusing to break. "There'll be more," he said. "I know that too." "You want me to ride the perimeter tonight?" "I want you to ride it every night until whoever did this gets tired of sneaking around in the dark like a coward." Luke nodded once, pulled his hat low. "Yes, ma'am." By noon, she'd found 2 more. Same cuts, same message. 3 cabs in one night, and every one of them placed where Margaret would find them first. Not Luke, not any hired hand. Margaret. Because this wasn't about cattle. This was about making a widow feel alone. She was standing at the kitchen basin, scrubbing blood off her hands, when she heard hooves. 2 riders coming up the main road, dust rising behind them like a dirty curtain. She dried her hands, reached for the shotgun Daniel had kept above the door, checked the chambers, walked out. The riders stopped 30 yards from the porch. One of them she recognized, Tom Avery, Crowley's foreman. Big man, shoulders like fence posts. The other was younger, a hand she didn't know, sitting his horse like he wished he were somewhere else. "Mrs. Mercer," Tom said, tipping his hat with the kind of courtesy that felt like a slap. "Callahan," Margaret corrected. "State your business." "Mr. Crowley sends his regards. He heard about your cattle trouble." "Did he?" "Terrible thing. Predators getting bold this time of year." "Predators don't use knives, Tom." Tom's smile didn't waver. "Well now, that's a serious accusation. You might want to be careful throwing words like that around, ma'am, especially without proof." "I've got 3 dead calves and a man on my porch who works for the only person in Red Hollow who wants my land. That's proof enough for conversation." Tom leaned forward in his saddle. "Mr. Crowley also wanted me to remind you that his offer still stands. 15 cents an acre now. That's generous, considering the difficulties you've been having." 3 cents more than last time. Must think I'm getting desperate. "Aren't you?" Margaret lifted the shotgun. Didn't aim it, just held it where it could be seen. "You're on my property, Tom. Daniel taught me to shoot at 14. I've killed rattlesnakes thicker than your neck. You want to deliver a message, deliver it. But don't you dare stand on my land and call me desperate." Tom's smile finally dropped. He glanced past her, at the barn, the bunkhouse, the empty corrals. "Where's your husband, Mrs. Mercer? The famous butcher?" "None of your concern." "Seems like it should be. A woman out here alone, no hands, no law. I said state your business or leave." Tom gathered his reins. 15 cents. You've got till end of the month." He turned his horse, then stopped. "Oh, and ma'am, you might want to check your water. This heat, wells go bad real quick." They rode off. Margaret stood on the porch until they were dust. Then she set the shotgun against the rail and let her hands shake. Just for 10 seconds. Then she stopped. Luke came around from behind the barn. He'd been there the whole time, she realized. Close enough to hear everything, far enough to let her handle it. "You heard," she said. Every word.
He threatened the water.
I know.
If they poison the well, we're done, Luke. The cattle, the garden, everything. We'd have to haul from Bitter Creek, and that's 8 miles.
They won't poison it.
How do you know?
Because I'll be watching. She studied him.
You can't watch everything. The fences, the cattle, the well, the perimeter. You're one man.
I've been one man my whole life, ma'am. I manage.
This isn't managing. This is war.
No. He shook his head slowly. This is a man with money squeezing a woman he thinks is alone. It ain't war. It's bullying. And bullies got a weakness.
What's that?
They don't expect you to hit back. Margaret crossed her arms.
I'm not asking you to kill anyone.
I ain't offering to.
Then what are you offering?
He stepped closer. Not much. Just enough that she could see the scar on his jaw clearly, the way it pulled at his skin when he spoke. I'm offering to be the thing that makes Crowley nervous. Right now he thinks I'm just a name, a story. He's testing whether the story is real. He paused. I intend to show him it is. Without violence? Without starting it. But, ma'am, I need you to understand something. He held her gaze. If they come at night, if they come with fire or weapons or anything that puts you in danger, I will not stand by. I will not restrain myself, and I will not apologize for what happens. Margaret felt her pulse in her throat.
Daniel wouldn't have wanted you to kill for me.
Daniel asked me to protect you. He didn't specify how. She looked away, looked at the dead prairie grass, the fence line, the sky that was white with heat and empty of mercy. Fine, she said, but you answer to me, not to whatever's eating you from the inside. You answer to me. Something moved across his face. Surprise, maybe, or something heavier. Yes, ma'am. He turned and walked toward the barn. Margaret watched him go, and she thought about Daniel, about the way he'd sit on this same porch and tell her the law was a fence that kept the wolves out. She'd believed him then. She didn't believe it now, because the wolves were wearing badges and carrying deeds, and the fence Daniel had built was being torn apart one post at a time. She went inside, bolted the door, and she prayed for the first time in 6 months. Not for safety, not for deliverance, for the strength to survive what was coming. The next morning, Luke was gone before sunrise. Margaret found his cot in the bunkhouse empty, blanket folded with military precision, boots gone. She told herself it didn't bother her, told herself she didn't care where he went, or when he came back, or whether he came back at all. She was lying. He returned at noon, riding hard, his horse lathered. He swung down and walked straight to her. Crowley filed a petition with the territorial office in Cheyenne, he said, challenging the validity of our marriage. Margaret's stomach dropped. On what grounds? On the grounds that I have a criminal history. He's arguing the governor's pardon doesn't erase the record, just the sentence. He's saying the court can't honor a marriage where one party is morally unfit. Morally unfit. That's rich, coming from a man who steals land for a living. Rich don't matter. Legal matters. If the petition goes through, the marriage gets annulled. You lose legal standing. The land reverts to territorial control. And Crowley buys it for pennies. That's the game. Margaret pressed her hand to her forehead. The heat was unbearable, but the cold in her gut was worse. How long do we have? Petition takes 60 days to process. Could be faster if Crowley's got a judge in Cheyenne.
He's got judges everywhere.
Then we've got less than 60 days. She paced. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. She could feel the walls of her life tightening, feel the ground shifting beneath her feet like sand in a river.
What do we do?
We make the marriage real. She stopped, stared at him. Not like that, he said quickly, and for the first time she saw color rise in his face, a flush that looked foreign on a man built from granite and scar tissue. I mean public. We go to town, together. We buy supplies. We eat at the hotel. We let people see us as a married couple. If the town can testify the marriage is legitimate, the petition loses weight. The town hates you. The town is afraid of me. That's different.
Is it?
Hate requires knowledge, ma'am. Fear only requires rumor. We change the story. We change the fear. Margaret shook her head. You want me to parade around Red Hollow holding hands with the butcher of Silver Creek? I want you to keep your land. If that means holding hands, I'll suffer through it. She almost laughed. Almost. It caught in her throat and died there, but he saw the ghost of it cross her face, and something softened in him, just slightly, just around the eyes, like a crack in frozen ground. Fine, she said. Tomorrow, we go to town. Yes, ma'am. And Luke? Ma'am, if anyone calls you a butcher to your face, you let me handle it. He tilted his head. Why? Because if I'm going to be Margaret Mercer in public, then they answer to me, not to your fists. He stared at her for a long moment. Then something happened that she hadn't seen before. His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything. But close. Yes, ma'am, he said. Town was worse than she expected. They rode in together, Luke on his black mare, Margaret driving the wagon. Side by side. Every eye on Main Street tracked them like gun barrels. The whispers started before they'd reached the general store. Lord, she actually brought him. Look at the size of him. No wonder they called him. Poor Margaret. Daniel must be rolling over. Margaret climbed down from the wagon, squared her shoulders, and walked into Patterson's general store like she owned the street. Luke followed. He took his hat off at the door. Margaret noticed that. It was small, but she noticed. Old Henry Patterson was behind the counter, and his face went through 3 colors when he saw Luke Mercer walk into his store. Mrs. Callahan, Mrs. he stammered. Margaret is fine, Henry. I need flour, sugar, salt, and a bolt of that blue cotton if you've still got it. Yes, of course. And whatever Mr. Mercer needs. Henry's eyes darted to Luke, who was standing by the door with his hands at his sides, making no move to touch anything, taking up as little space as a man his size could manage. Just nails, Luke said. 10 penny. 2 pounds. Henry nodded, his hands trembling as he measured the nails. Margaret noticed and felt a surge of something. Anger, maybe, or frustration, at the absurdity of a grown man shaking because another man walked through his door. A voice came from the back of the store. Well, well, the widow and her pet killer. Margaret turned. Rose Whitfield, Pastor Whitfield's wife, the unofficial mouth of Red Hollow. She stood by the fabric bolts with her arms crossed and her chin high, and the kind of righteous certainty that made Margaret's blood heat. Mrs. Whitfield, Margaret said. Nice to see you. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've lost your mind, Margaret. Marrying that man. Bringing him into town like he's civilized. Luke didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't breathe different. He is civilized, Rose, Margaret said. More civilized than anyone in this town who watched my cattle get slaughtered and said nothing. Rose's face tightened. No one... 3 cabs, Rose, killed on my property. Knifed. And not one person in Red Hollow asked if I was all right. Not one. Not the pastor, Not the sheriff. Not you.
That's not fair.
Fair is a word for people who've never been tested. The store was silent. Henry had stopped measuring. A man near the window had set down his tobacco tin. Everyone was listening. Rose drew herself up.
Your husband was a good man. The best sheriff this town ever had. And you replaced him with, she gestured at Luke, that.
Margaret stepped forward. One step. Her voice dropped low. Daniel died protecting this town. He died because he believed in you. In all of you. And the minute he was gone, Victor Crowley came for his land, and not one of you stood between me and the wolf. So don't you dare stand in this store and lecture me about my choices. I made the only choice you left me. Rose opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again.
I'll pray for you, Margaret.
Pray for yourself, Rose. You're the one who'll have to live with knowing you watched and did nothing. Margaret turned, collected her supplies, paid, walked out. Luke followed, carrying the flour sack over one shoulder like it weighed nothing. At the wagon, he loaded the supplies without a word. Then he stopped, looked at her. You didn't need me in there, he said.
No.
You don't need me for a lot of things.
Probably not.
Then why'd you bring me? Margaret climbed into the wagon, took the reins, looked straight ahead.
Because you're my husband. And in this town, that means something, whether they like it or not.
She snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, and for 3 blocks, neither of them said a word. But the silence was different now. Not the wall they'd built between them. Something else. Something thinner. Something you could almost see through. They were halfway home when Luke spoke. My commanding officer's name was Colonel Briggs, he said. Margaret kept her eyes on the road. Didn't push, didn't press. He ordered us to clear a settlement. Apache women and children. Said they were harboring fighters. Luke's voice was flat, controlled. The voice of a man reciting facts he'd rather forget. I refused. Told him I didn't sign up to kill children. What happened? He had me stripped and whipped in front of the company. 30 lashes. I passed out at 22. Woke up tied to a wagon wheel. Margaret's hands tightened on the reins. The settlement? Another unit cleared it. I heard the gunfire from where I was tied. He paused. I couldn't stop it. I tried to stop it, and I couldn't.
That's not your fault.
Maybe not, but it's my weight. She let that sit. Let the wagon wheels turn, and the dust rise, and the silence hold them. Is that why you kill? She asked. Not harsh, not gentle, just honest. No, ma'am. I kill because some men don't give you another option. But every time I do, I hear those gunshots. Every time. And I wonder if I'm any different from the men who fired them. You are. How do you know? Because the men who fired those shots didn't lose sleep over it. You haven't stopped losing sleep since. He looked at her. She felt it, felt his eyes on the side of her face like heat from a fire. You remind me of him, Luke said quietly. Of who? Daniel. He saw things in people, things they didn't see in themselves. Margaret's eyes stung. She blinked hard, wouldn't cry, refused. He saw something in you, she said. He saw a man who needed a purpose. And now? Luke was quiet for a long time. Now I've got one. They didn't speak again until the ranch. Margaret pulled the wagon up to the porch, and Luke unloaded the supplies, and they moved around each other with the careful choreography of 2 people learning a dance neither of them had agreed to. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep again. She sat on the porch,
Same glass of water, same heat, same dark. But this time, when Luke came around on his nightly walk, she didn't have to tell him to sit. He sat. Same end of the steps, same 4 feet between them. "Luke?" "Ma'am?" "My name is Margaret." A beat. Margaret. The way he said it, careful, like the word might break if he held it wrong, made something shift in her chest. Something she hadn't felt in so long, she'd forgotten the shape of it. "Thank you," she said, "for today, for standing there and not reacting when Rose—" She wasn't wrong. She was absolutely wrong. I mean about me, about what I am. She wasn't wrong about the killing. She was wrong about you.
There's a difference between what a man's done and what a man is. He pulled his hat off, held it in both hands. She'd noticed he did that when he was thinking. Held his hat like an anchor, something to grip while the rest of him drifted. "Daniel used to say that," he said softly. "Then maybe you should start believing it." He looked at her, and in the dark, with the stars burning white overhead and the heat pressing down like a blanket they couldn't throw off, she saw something in his face that was raw and unfinished and terrifying. He was afraid of her. Not physically. Not the way men feared what they couldn't control. He was afraid of her the way a man is afraid of the one thing that might save him. Because saving means changing. And changing means letting go of the only version of himself he knows how to be. "Good night, Margaret," he said. "Good night, Luke." He stood, walked into the dark. She watched him go, and she thought, "Daniel, what did you send me? Not a protector, not a killer, not a husband. Something worse. A man she might actually learn to trust." Inside the bunkhouse, Luke sat on the edge of his cot and pressed his fists against his eyes until he saw white. He could still feel the way she'd said his name. Not like a curse, not like a warning, but like a word she was trying on for size. Like something she might keep. He reached for the letter, read it again by moonlight. "Look after Maggie." "I'm trying, Daniel," he whispered. "God help me, I'm trying." He folded the letter, slipped it back inside his coat. Outside, the night pressed against the walls, heavy and hot, and full of things that moved in the dark. And somewhere, in a house 5 miles away, with white columns and oil lamps burning in every window, Victor Crowley sat at his desk and read the report his men had delivered. "Marriage appears legitimate. Mercer is present and armed. The widow is not breaking." Crowley folded the report, dropped it into the fire. He reached for his pen, wrote 2 words on a fresh piece of paper. "Burn it." And the night got darker. The smell hit her before the sound did. Margaret sat up in bed, lungs full of something thick and wrong, and for 2 seconds she didn't understand. Then her throat closed. Her eyes burned, and the orange glow crawling under her bedroom door told her everything she needed to know. Fire. She threw the blanket off and hit the floor. The boards were hot beneath her bare feet. She grabbed her robe, pulled it on, and reached for the door handle. Metal scorched her palm. She yanked back, skin already blistering, and the pain cut through the smoke fog in her head like a knife through cotton. "Luke!" she screamed. No answer, just the roar. The deep, breathing, hungry roar of a fire that had already eaten the porch and was working its way through the front wall like a living thing with teeth. She dropped low, crawled toward the back of the house. The hallway was black with smoke, and she couldn't see 2 feet ahead. But she knew this house, knew it with her body, with her bones, with every step she'd taken in 9 years of living here with a man who was now dead and a future that was now burning. The back door was jammed. She threw her shoulder against it. Once. Twice. 3 times. The wood buckled, but didn't break, and she could feel the heat behind her growing, pressing against her back like a hand pushing her forward into a wall that wouldn't move. "Luke!" Glass shattered. Not from the fire, from outside. Someone was breaking the kitchen window, breaking it deliberately, breaking it with force. And then hands came through the jagged frame, big hands, bleeding hands, and Luke Mercer's voice cut through the smoke like the only clear thing left in the world. "Margaret, take my hands!" She couldn't see him, could only feel the grip, iron, desperate, unbreakable, closing around her wrists and pulling her toward the window. "I can't fit the frame." "You can. Tuck your arms. I've got you." She tucked. He pulled. Glass bit into her hip, her shoulder, her thigh, and she felt the hot rush of blood mix with the sweat and the soot. But she was moving, out, through, into air that was smoky but breathable. And then she was on the ground, and Luke was over her, shielding her body with his, and the house behind them was screaming. Not a metaphor. The wood screamed. The beams cracked and shrieked, and the roof caved in with a sound like a giant breaking a piano over its knee. And Margaret pressed her face into the dirt and felt Luke's weight against her back and thought, "Everything. Everything Daniel built. Everything I kept. Gone." Luke pulled her up. His shirt was burned through at the shoulders. Blisters covered his forearms. Blood ran from his hands where the glass had torn them open. "Can you stand?" he said. "Yes." "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Then walk, now, away from the house." She walked. He walked beside her, one hand on her back. The first time he'd touched her since the handshake at the courthouse. And she didn't pull away. Couldn't. Because his hand was the only solid thing in a world that was turning to ash. They stopped 50 yards out. Turned. The Callahan ranch house was a pillar of fire. Margaret watched it burn. Watched 9 years of marriage, 6 months of widowhood, and every photograph of Daniel she owned turn to light and then to nothing. She didn't cry. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But something inside her had locked. A door slamming shut, a bolt sliding home. And what came out instead of tears was a voice she barely recognized. "Crowley." Luke nodded. "Kerosene. I smelled it before the smoke. Poured along the porch and the front wall. Professional. Meant to trap you inside. Meant to kill me. Meant to scare you. If they wanted you dead, they'd have blocked the windows too. So this is what scaring looks like. This is what desperation looks like. He's running out of patience." Margaret's hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. A rage so deep and so old that it felt like it had been living in her bones since the day Daniel died, and she'd stood at his grave, and every man in town had looked at her like she was already gone. "I want to talk to him," she said. "No. I want to look Victor Crowley in the face and—" "No, Margaret, not tonight. Not like this. Don't tell me no." Luke stepped in front of her. Close. Closer than he'd ever stood. She could feel the heat coming off his burned skin. Could smell the smoke in his hair. Could see the fire reflected in his eyes, like something that had always been there, and was only now being lit from the outside. "Listen to me," he said, and his voice was low and rough and shaking with something she'd never heard in it before. Not anger, not control, but the sound of a man who had just pulled a woman out of a fire and was trying very hard not to go back into town and do something that couldn't be undone. "If I go to Crowley tonight, I will kill him. I know that. I know it the way I know my own name. And if I kill him, everything we've built falls apart. The marriage, the land, your name, everything."
"He burned my house."
"I know."
"He burned Daniel's house. Daniel's things. The only photograph I had of my wedding day."
"I know."
"And you're telling me to wait?"
"I'm telling you that the man who set this fire wants me to ride into town with a gun. He wants the butcher of Silver Creek. He wants me to prove every story they've ever told about me." Luke's jaw tightened. "And I won't give him that. Not tonight. Not ever." Margaret stared at him. The fire crackled behind them, timbers falling, sparks rising into a sky that didn't care.
"Then what do we do?"
"We survive the night, and tomorrow we fight smart." She was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded. They moved to the barn. Luke cleared a space in the hay, laid out horse blankets, and Margaret sat down and wrapped her arms around her knees and stared at nothing while Luke tended to his burns with water from the trough. She watched him work, watched him peel the charred fabric from his forearms without flinching, watched him wrap the cuts on his hands with strips torn from his undershirt, watched him move with the efficiency of a man who had treated his own wounds so many times it had become as routine as saddling a horse. "Let me see your hands," she said. "I'm fine. Let me see them, Luke." He hesitated, then held them out. She took them, turned them over. The glass cuts were deep, 2 on his right palm, 1 across the knuckles of his left. She could see the white of tendon beneath the blood on his right hand.
"You need stitches."
"I've had worse."
"That's not the point."
She tore another strip from the blanket, dipped it in water, and began cleaning the cuts with a gentleness that seemed to confuse him. He watched her hands move over his like he'd never been touched carefully before. Like care itself was a foreign language he was hearing for the first time.
"You came through a burning window for me," she said.
"Yes, ma'am."
"Margaret."
"Margaret."
"Why didn't you go for the door?"
"Tried. The porch was gone. Whole front of the house was an oven. The kitchen window was the only point of entry that wasn't fully engulfed."
"You punched through glass."
"I did."
"With your bare hands."
"Didn't have time to find a rock." She finished wrapping his right hand, started on his left.
"You could have died."
"Wasn't thinking about that."
"What were you thinking about?"
He was quiet for a moment. She felt his fingers twitch in her grip, not pulling away, but holding. "I was thinking that if you died in that house, I'd have failed 2 people, Daniel and you. And I failed enough people for 1 lifetime." She finished the bandage, tied it off, but she didn't let go of his hand.
"You didn't fail," she said. "I'm alive."
"Your house is gone."
"Houses are wood and nails. I'm flesh and blood, and I'm still here."
He looked at their hands, hers small and burned, his large and wrapped in bloody cotton, both shaking.
"Margaret, don't say you're sorry. Don't say it was your fault. Don't say any of the things I can see you building behind your eyes right now."
He closed his mouth.
"Say something else," she said.
"Like what?"
"Like what you're actually feeling. Not what you think you should feel. Not what a man like you is supposed to feel. What you actually feel, right now, in this barn, with my house burning behind us."
He pulled his hand from hers, pressed both fists against his knees. She saw his shoulders rise and fall, once, twice, and she understood that she was watching a man dismantle a wall he'd spent 34 years building. "I'm scared," he said. The word came out broken, jagged, like a bone snapping through skin. "Not of Crowley, not of the fire. I'm scared that I'm going to do something that makes you look at me the way everyone else does. Like a monster. Like something to be afraid of." His voice cracked. I'm scared that one morning you're going to wake up and see me for what I am, and wish you'd chosen Crowley's offer instead. Luke, I've killed 11 men, Margaret. 11. Some of them deserved it. Some of them probably didn't. And I carry every single one of them every single day like rocks in my chest. And I can't put them down, because the minute I put them down, I have to admit that I'm the kind of man who can carry them at all. She didn't speak. She let the silence hold. Let his words settle into the air between them like smoke clearing after a fire. Then she moved. Not far, just across the space between them, that 4 feet of deliberate distance that they'd been maintaining since the courthouse, since the wagon, since every porch step and every careful conversation. She closed it. She sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and she felt the heat of him, not from the fire, from him, from whatever furnace was burning inside a man who'd just told her the truest thing he'd ever said. I'm not going to look at you like that, she said. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. You don't know that. I know that a monster doesn't run into a burning house for someone else. I know that a monster doesn't lose sleep over the men he's killed. I know that a monster doesn't sit in a barn with bloody hands and tell a woman he's scared. She turned to face him. You are not what they call you, Luke Mercer. You are what you choose. And tonight, you chose me. He looked at her, and she kissed him. Not gentle, not tentative, not the kind of kiss that asks permission or tests the water. She kissed him the way a woman kisses a man when she's lost everything and found the one thing worth keeping. With her whole mouth, her whole body, her whole burning, furious, unbroken self. He froze. For 1 second, one terrible, suspended second, he didn't move. And Margaret thought she'd made the worst mistake of her life. Thought she'd misread everything. Thought... He kissed her back. His bandaged hands came up and held her face. Not hard, not possessive, but steady. The way you hold something you've been looking for your whole life and are terrified of breaking. And Margaret felt the wall between them not crack, not crumble, but dissolve. Like it had never been stone at all. Just smoke, just fear, just the shared illusion of 2 people who'd been alone so long they'd forgotten that alone wasn't the only option. She pulled back, pressed her forehead to his, breathed. I didn't plan that, she said. I know. I'm not sorry. I ain't asking you to be. Good. She pulled back further, looked at him. Because I'm going to need you tomorrow. All of you. Not the version you show the world. Not the butcher. Not the bounty hunter. You. What happens tomorrow? Tomorrow we go to war. His eyes searched hers, finding something, testing something, believing something. Together, he said. Together. He nodded once, the way a man nods when he's made a decision he can't come back from. They sat in the barn while the house burned itself to embers. They didn't sleep. They didn't talk much. Margaret leaned against his shoulder, and he put his arm around her, awkward, unsure, like a man relearning a gesture he'd given up on years ago. And they watched the fire die through the open barn door. At some point, she heard him whisper something. She almost missed it, almost let it pass. I don't deserve this. She didn't argue, didn't correct him, just pressed closer and said, Neither did I. And here we are. Dawn broke red and angry. Margaret stood in front of what had been her home and made a list in her head. Not of what she'd lost. That list was too long. Of what she still had. The barn, the well, 60 head of cattle, a hay shed, A husband with bloody hands and a heart bigger than his reputation. And rage. She had plenty of that. Luke. He was already saddled, already armed. Not with a rifle, with papers. The ones he'd brought from Cheyenne, the ones he'd gathered in his early morning rides. Land surveys, purchase receipts, tax records. "Where are those from?" she asked. "Territorial office. Crowley's name appears on 12 land purchases in the last 3 years. Every one of them preceded by incidents. Fires, cattle kills, water poisoning. Same pattern, same result. Rancher sells, Crowley buys." "You've been gathering this the whole time?" "Since before the wedding. Daniel sent me a second letter. I didn't tell you about it because I wasn't sure yet. But I am now." "What second letter?" Luke pulled a worn envelope from his coat, handed it to her. Margaret opened it, read. Daniel's handwriting. She'd know it anywhere. The way his R's tilted left. The way he pressed too hard on his periods. "Luke, Crowley is dirty. I've got evidence but can't move on it. Judge Hawthorne is compromised. If something happens to me, the documents are in the floor safe under the kitchen. Combination is Maggie's birthday. Don't let him take the land. Don't let him take her." Margaret's hands shook. "The kitchen," she said. They both looked at the smoking ruins of the house. "The floor safe is iron," Luke said. "It might have survived." Margaret was already walking. She kicked through charred timber, soot coating her nightgown, her bare feet burning on hot ground. Luke grabbed her arm. "Boots first. You'll burn your feet off." He brought her boots from the barn. She pulled them on over bare skin and waded back into the wreckage. They found the safe under 3 inches of ash and a collapsed beam. Luke hauled the beam aside with his burned hands, and Margaret knelt and spun the combination. Her birthday, March 17th, 1952, and the lock clicked open. Inside, a leather folder, singed at the edges but intact. Margaret opened it. Land transfer documents with forged signatures. Bank statements showing payments from Crowley to Judge Hawthorne. A sworn affidavit from a ranch hand named Billy Sutter, who'd witnessed Crowley's men setting fires to the Dawson property 18 months ago. "Daniel knew," Margaret whispered. "He knew all of it." He knew, and he was building a case. He just didn't finish it. "Because he died." Luke's jaw flexed. "Because someone made sure he died." Margaret looked up. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your husband was shot by a drifter nobody ever identified. I'm saying that drifter was never caught because nobody looked too hard. And I'm saying Victor Crowley had more reason to want Daniel Callahan dead than any drifter ever would." The words hit her like a fist. "No." "Margaret, no. Daniel was killed in a robbery. A random—" "Nothing about Crowley is random." She pressed the folder against her chest. Her eyes burned. Not from smoke this time. "You think he killed my husband." "I think he paid someone to kill your husband, and I think the proof might be in that folder." Margaret stood. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Her chest was full of something enormous, grief and fury and a 6-month-old scream that she'd been holding in her throat since the day they put Daniel in the ground. "Then we end this," she said. "Today, right now. We ride into town and we put these documents in front of every person in Red Hollow and we burn Victor Crowley to the ground." "Not the town. The territorial marshal. Crowley owns the town. We go over his head." "The marshal's office is in Cheyenne. That's 3 days' ride." "We don't need to ride. We need to send word. There's a telegraph office in Hayden, 20 miles east. Crowley doesn't own Hayden." Margaret looked at him. At this man, this scarred, broken, feared, hated, whipped, burned man, who was standing in the ashes of her life, and giving her a way out that didn't involve a single bullet. "You planned this," she said. "I planned for Crowley to push. I didn't plan for him to push this far." "But you were ready." "I promised Daniel I'd protect you. I don't make promises I can't keep." She gripped the folder tighter. "Then let's ride." They saddled both horses. Margaret changed into the one set of clothes that had been hanging in the barn to dry. A pair of Daniel's old trousers and a work shirt that smelled like hay and horse. She tucked the folder inside the shirt, against her skin. Luke checked his revolver, loaded it, holstered it. Margaret watched. "I thought you said no bullets." "I said I wouldn't start it. I didn't say I wouldn't finish it." They rode east, fast. The morning heat was already brutal, and the road to Hayden was open prairie. No cover, no shade, nowhere to hide if someone came looking. Someone came looking. 3 miles out, Margaret heard hoofbeats behind them. She looked back. 3 riders, moving fast, kicking up a dust column that told her they weren't out for a morning ride. "Luke, I hear them." "Crowley's men?" "Who else?" "What do we do?" Luke didn't slow down, didn't speed up. He rode steady and said one word. "Trust me." Margaret's hand went to the folder against her chest. Daniel's evidence. Daniel's last fight, still being fought by a dead man's wife and the outlaw he'd sent to save her. The hoofbeats got louder, and Margaret Callahan, widow, rancher, wife of a killer, daughter of no one who mattered to the law, leaned forward in her saddle and rode harder. The first shot cracked past Margaret's ear, close enough to feel the heat of it. She flinched hard, nearly lost her grip on the reins, and her horse lurched sideways. Luke's hand shot out and grabbed her bridle, steadying the animal without breaking stride. "Stay low," he shouted. "Flat against the neck. Don't stop." A second shot kicked up dirt 3 feet to her left. Margaret pressed her chest against the horse's mane and felt the folder shift against her ribs. Daniel's evidence. Daniel's last words. The only weapon she had that didn't require a trigger. Luke pulled his revolver. Didn't turn. Didn't aim. He held it at his side and rode. "Aren't you going to shoot back?" Margaret yelled. "Not yet. They're shooting at us. They're shooting wide. Warning shots. Crowley doesn't want us dead. He wants us stopped. And if they stop shooting wide, then I stop being patient." A third shot split the air between them. This one wasn't wide. This one punched through the cantle of Margaret's saddle, and she felt the impact shudder through the leather into her spine. Luke turned in his saddle. One motion. Fluid. The kind of turn a man makes when he's done it 1,000 times and stopped thinking about it 200 times ago. He fired once. The lead rider's hat flew off his head. Clean shot. 2 inches above the skull. Not a miss. A message. The riders pulled up, all 3. Horses skidding, dust rising, men cursing. Luke holstered the revolver and kicked his horse forward. "Ride," he said, "now, while they're thinking." Margaret rode. She rode until her thighs burned and her lungs ached, and the hoofbeats behind them faded from thunder to whisper to nothing. They didn't slow down until Hayden appeared on the horizon, a cluster of rooftops and a church steeple, and the thin black line of a telegraph wire cutting across the sky. Margaret's hands were shaking so bad she could barely hold the reins. She pulled up behind the telegraph office and slid off her horse, and her knees buckled. Luke caught her, held her upright, didn't let go until she nodded. "I'm all right." "You're not." "I will be. Give me a minute." He gave her a minute, stood between her and the road, watching the horizon. His burned hands rested on his belt, one near the holster, one near the folder she'd handed him. "That shot," Margaret said, "the one that hit my saddle, that wasn't wide." "No." "They could have killed me." They won't get another chance." She looked at him, at the way he stood, not like a man guarding something, but like a wall, something built to absorb impact, something that wouldn't move. "Let's send the wire," she said. The telegraph operator in Hayden was a thin man named Cecil, with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He looked at Luke like a rabbit looks at a coyote. "Help you folks? I need to send a message to the U.S. Territorial Marshal's office in Cheyenne," Margaret said. "Priority transmission." Cecil glanced at Luke again. That's a government line, ma'am. Priority costs double." "Then charge me double." Margaret dictated the message while Cecil's key clicked. She kept it short. Daniel had taught her that. Say what matters, cut the rest. Marshal Tommel Beck, stop. Evidence of land fraud, arson, and judicial corruption in Red Hollow, Wyoming. Stop. Suspect Victor Crowley. Stop. Documents secured. Stop. Requesting immediate investigation. Stop. Margaret Callahan Mercer, widow of Sheriff Daniel Callahan. Stop. Cecil's hand paused on the last word. He looked up. "You're Daniel Callahan's widow?" "I am." "I knew Daniel. He came through here twice, maybe 3 times. Good man. Honest man." Cecil pushed his spectacles up. "I heard what happened. Real sorry." "Thank you." "And this," Cecil looked at the message. "This is about Crowley?" "It is." Cecil was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled open a drawer, took out a second form, and began copying the message. "What are you doing?" Luke asked. "Sending a copy to the federal office in Denver, in case the Cheyenne wire gets intercepted." Cecil's fingers worked the key with sudden, deliberate speed. "Crowley's got eyes in Cheyenne. Everyone knows it. But he ain't got nobody in Denver." Margaret felt something crack open in her chest. Not pain, not grief. Gratitude. The raw, unexpected kind that ambushes you when you've been fighting alone so long you forgot other people could help. "Thank you, Cecil." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when they arrest that son of a—" He caught himself. "Pardon my language, ma'am. I've heard worse today." Cecil finished the transmission, handed Margaret a receipt. "Response time from Cheyenne is usually 48 hours. Denver might be faster." "We don't have 48 hours, Luke said. "Then I'd suggest you find somewhere safe to wait. Because if Crowley finds out you've sent this, he won't send warning shots next time." Margaret folded the receipt into the folder, pressed the folder against her body. "We're going back to Red Hollow," she said. Luke looked at her. "That's not safe." "My land is in Red Hollow. My cattle are in Red Hollow. Everything I own that didn't burn last night is in Red Hollow. I'm not hiding in Hayden while Crowley finishes what he started." "Margaret, I'm going back. You can come with me or you can stay here. But I'm going back." He stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he put his hat on. "I'm coming with you." They rode back slower. The heat had peaked. Midday, July, Wyoming Territory. The kind of heat that doesn't just press down on you, but crawls inside you and drinks whatever's left. Margaret's lips were cracked. Her burned hand throbbed. Her hip bled through Daniel's old trousers where the window glass had cut her the night before. She didn't complain, didn't slow down, just rode. Luke matched her pace, kept his eyes on the horizon. The riders from the morning didn't reappear. "They'll know," Margaret said, "about the telegram. Cecil won't talk, but someone in Hayden will." "Probably. So what happens when we get back?" "Crowley comes to us, on our terms, on our land." "What's left of our land?" "The barn's still standing, The well's still good. The cattle are still alive." He paused. "And you're still alive. That's all that matters." "You keep saying that." "Because you keep forgetting it." She almost smiled. Almost. It died somewhere between her mouth and her eyes, but he saw the attempt, and something in him responded. A softening, a yielding, the smallest possible shift in a man who is built from hard edges and harder choices. They reached Red Hollow at dusk. The town was different. Margaret felt it the moment they crossed Main Street. People were watching from windows, from doorways, from the shadowed alleys between buildings. Not the hostile stares of before. Something else. Something uncertain. Something that smelled like fear. Not fear of Luke. Fear of what was coming. Old Henry Patterson stepped out of his store as they passed. He didn't say anything, just nodded. A small nod. The kind a man gives when he's choosing a side and doesn't want to announce it yet. Dr. Alan Whitaker was standing outside his office. He saw Margaret's burned hand, the blood on her clothes, the soot in her hair. "Mrs. Callahan, you need medical attention." "I need a lot of things, doctor. Medical attention is third on the list." "What's first?" "Justice. Second is water. If you've got water, I'll take that now and work on justice tomorrow." Dr. Whitaker brought 2 canteens. Margaret drank one. Luke drank the other. "I saw your house," the doctor said quietly. "Rode out this morning when I heard. Margaret, that fire was set. Anyone with eyes can see that." "I know who set it." "Everyone knows who set it. The question is whether anyone will say it out loud." Margaret looked at him. "Will you?" Dr. Whitaker rubbed his jaw. He was 60, gray-bearded, the kind of man who delivered half the children in Red Hollow and buried the other half's parents. He'd been neutral his whole life. Switzerland with a stethoscope. "Daniel was my friend," he said finally. "Best friend I had in this town. And I've been a coward since he died. I looked the other way when Crowley bought the Dawson Ranch for nothing. Looked the other way when the Miller family was run off. Told myself it wasn't my fight." He straightened. "It's my fight now." "What changed?" "He burned your house, Margaret, with you in it. That's not business. That's murder." Dr. Whitaker looked at Luke. "And you, Mr. Mercer, I owe you an apology. I believed the stories. Every one of them. Most of them are true," Luke said. "Maybe. But the one that matters, the one about you being a monster, that one ain't true. A monster doesn't carry a woman out of a fire." Luke said nothing. But Margaret saw his throat move, saw him swallow something that had been stuck there for a long time. Word traveled fast. By nightfall, 3 more people had come to the barn, because the barn was all Margaret had left, and these 3 came to it like people come to a church after a disaster. Not because they believe, but because they need to. Sarah Brennan, widow. Crowley had bought her husband's store for half its value after a mysterious fire destroyed the inventory. She'd been silent for 2 years. Tom Harding, rancher. His water rights had been reassigned by Judge Hawthorne 6 months ago. He'd fought it and lost. And, to Margaret's shock, Rose Whitfield, the pastor's wife, walked into the barn with her head down and her hands clasped, and the righteous certainty she'd worn in Patterson's store completely gone. In its place was something Margaret recognized. Shame. "I came to apologize," Rose said. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. I stood in that store and called your husband a killer, while the real killer in this town was buying my silence with donations to the church. Victor Crowley gave $600 to the building fund last year. I knew where the money came from. I didn't care." Her voice broke. "I cared about my church more than I cared about my neighbor.
And for that, I am truly sorry." Margaret took Rose's hands, held them. "Then help me now." "How?" "Be a witness. When the marshal comes, tell him what you know. Tell him about the donations. Tell him about the pressure. Tell him about every conversation you've overheard in the parsonage when Crowley came to talk to your husband." Rose's eyes widened.
"Those were private..." "Rose, he burned my house. He killed my cattle. He may have killed my husband. Private doesn't exist anymore." Rose nodded, slowly, like a woman stepping off a cliff and trusting the ground to catch her. "I'll testify." One by one they came, that night and the next morning. Not a flood, a trickle. But a trickle is how rivers start. By the time the sun rose, Margaret had 7 sworn statements, 4 eyewitness accounts of Crowley's intimidation tactics, and Dr. Whitaker's medical documentation of her injuries from the fire. Luke organized the evidence, labeled it, cross-referenced it with Daniel's documents from the floor safe. He worked with the focus of a man who understood that the most dangerous weapon in the West wasn't a gun. It was paper with the right names on it. Margaret watched him work and felt something she hadn't expected. Pride. Not the romantic kind. The deep kind. The kind you feel when you watch someone become the person they were supposed to be before the world broke them. "Luke. When this is over, when Crowley's arrested and the land is safe and the house is rebuilt, what happens to us?" He stopped writing, set down the pen. "What do you want to happen?" "I asked you first." He turned to face her, and she saw something she'd never seen in him before. Not fear, not shame, not the controlled emptiness he wore like armor. She saw hope. Small and fragile and newborn, blinking in the light like a creature emerging from a long, dark underground. "I want to stay," he said, "if you'll have me. Not because of the law, not because of Daniel's letter. Because of you." "Because of me?" "Because you're the first person in my life who looked at what I am and didn't run. Because you kissed me in a barn while your house was burning, and you tasted like smoke and rage, and something I can't name, but want to spend the rest of my life trying to." Margaret's eyes filled. She let them. For the first time since Daniel died, she let the tears come without fighting them, without clenching her jaw, without turning away. "I choose you," she said. "Not because Daniel sent you, not because the law required it, because you ran into a fire for me, because you shot a man's hat off instead of his head, because you sit on the far end of the porch like you're afraid of taking up too much space in my life. And Luke Mercer, I need you to stop sitting so far away." He crossed the barn in 3 steps, took her face in his bandaged hands, pressed his forehead to hers. "I'll rebuild your house," he said. "Our house. Our house." "And Luke?" "Yeah?" "You take up exactly the right amount of space." He kissed her. Gentle this time. Not the fire and fury kiss in the barn the night before, but something softer. Something that said, "I'm here. I'm staying. I'm not the man they said I was, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it." The marshal arrived on the 3rd day. Thomas Beck rode into Red Hollow with 4 deputies and a federal warrant. And the sound of those hooves on Main Street was the loudest silence Margaret had ever heard. Every door closed. Every window curtain drew shut. The town held its breath. Beck was a tall man with a white mustache and eyes that had seen enough corruption to fill a cemetery. He dismounted in front of the burned remains of the Callahan ranch and took his hat off. "Mrs. Mercer?" "Mrs. Callahan. The land carries my first husband's name." Beck nodded. "Ma'am, I received your wire, and the one from Denver, and 6 additional statements forwarded through the Hayden telegraph office by a Mr. Cecil Watts, who seems very motivated to see justice done." Margaret almost laughed. Cecil. The thin man with ink-stained fingers. The rabbit who'd turned out to be braver than every lion in Red Hollow. "I have evidence," Margaret said. She handed him Daniel's folder. "My husband, Sheriff Daniel Callahan, compiled this before his death. Land fraud, judicial bribery, arson, and I believe—" Her voice caught. She pushed through. "I believe Victor Crowley ordered my husband's murder." Beck opened the folder, read. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened with each page. "This is thorough," he said. "Your husband was a good lawman." "The best." "We'll need to verify the documents, interview witnesses." "I have 7 sworn statements. Dr. Whitaker has medical evidence of my injuries from the fire. And I have witnesses who will testify to Crowley's pattern of intimidation across multiple properties." Beck closed the folder, looked at Luke. "And you're Luke Mercer?" "Yes, sir. The butcher of Silver Creek." Luke didn't flinch. "That's what they call me. I know what they call you. I also know what the governor's pardon says. And I know that 3 of the men you killed in Silver Creek were on a federal wanted list for trafficking." Beck extended his hand. "You did the marshals a favor, Mr. Mercer. Unofficial, but noted." Luke shook his hand, said nothing. But Margaret saw his shoulders drop, just slightly, just a fraction of an inch. Like a weight he'd been carrying, had been acknowledged for the first time by someone with the authority to recognize it. Beck turned to his deputies. "Ride to Crowley's ranch, serve the warrant. If he resists, arrest him. If he runs, pursue." They didn't have to pursue. Victor Crowley rode into town an hour later, on his own. No hands, no foreman, no entourage. Just a man on a horse who had finally run out of people willing to do his dirty work. He dismounted in the center of Main Street, straightened his coat, looked at Margaret. "This is a mistake," he said. "Whatever this woman has told you, Marshal, is the fabrication of a grief-stricken widow manipulated by a convicted killer." "Mr. Crowley," Beck said, "you are under arrest for land fraud, arson, judicial bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder." "Murder? That's absurd. I've never—" "We recovered financial records from Judge Hawthorne's office this morning. He's been cooperative since we informed him of the federal penalties for obstruction. He's named you as the principal in the death of Sheriff Daniel Callahan." The street went silent. Margaret felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not physically, spiritually. The thing she'd suspected, the thing Luke had said in the ashes of her house, someone made sure he died, was no longer suspicion. It was fact. Victor Crowley had paid someone to murder her husband. Her knees didn't buckle. Her voice didn't break. She stood on the street where Daniel had walked every day of his life as sheriff, and she looked at the man who had taken him from her. "You killed him," she said. Crowley's mask cracked. Not much, but enough. "He was in the way," Crowley said. And the casualness of it, the sheer, nauseating casualness, hit Margaret harder than anything else he could have said. "He was a man," she said. "He was my husband. He was the father of children we never got to have. He was the best person in this town, and you killed him because he was in your way." "The railroad is worth nothing. The railroad is worth nothing compared to a human life. And you will spend the rest of yours understanding that." Beck stepped forward. Crowley's hand moved toward his coat. "Don't," Luke said. One word. Quiet. The quietest word Margaret had ever heard a man speak. And it carried more weight than a gunshot. Crowley's hand stopped. "I wouldn't," Luke said. "Not today. Not in front of her." Crowley looked at Luke. at the scars, at the bandaged hands, at the eyes that held 11 dead men and the restraint to not make it 12. "You're a killer," Crowley said. I was, but the woman standing next to me showed me there's something harder than killing. What's that? Choosing not to. Beck's deputies moved in, cuffed Crowley, put him on a horse. As they led him away, Crowley turned once more, looked at Margaret. "Your husband was a fool," he said, "and you married another one." Margaret stepped forward. Her voice was clear, steady, made of iron and sunlight and 6 months of grief forged into something unbreakable. "My husband was a hero, and the man I married is the bravest person in this territory. You don't get to speak about either of them. Not today, not ever again." Crowley said nothing. They led him away. The street stood still, and then, slowly, like ice cracking on a spring river, the town began to move. Doors opened. People stepped out. Heads nodded. Hats tipped. Old Henry Patterson walked across the street and shook Luke's hand. Dr. Whitaker put his arm around Margaret's shoulders. Rose Whitfield stood on the church steps and wept openly, and for once, nobody told her to stop. And Margaret Callahan, widow, rancher, fighter, wife, stood in the middle of Red Hollow and let herself feel something she'd forgotten existed. Not victory, not relief. Justice. The kind that doesn't erase what was lost, but honors it. The kind that says, "You mattered. Your life mattered. And the people who took you from me will answer for it." She reached for Luke's hand, found it, held it. He held hers back. And for the first time in 6 months, the town of Red Hollow didn't look away. Margaret didn't sleep that night either, but for a different reason. Not fear, not grief, not the hollow, aching emptiness that had lived inside her chest since Daniel's funeral. Something else, something restless and alive and unfamiliar, like a seed cracking open underground, pushing toward life it hadn't seen yet. She sat on a hay bale in the barn, her home now, her only home, and she held Daniel's folder in her lap, and she read his handwriting one more time. Not the evidence, not the legal documents, the note he'd written on the inside cover, the one she hadn't noticed until tonight, because she'd been too busy surviving to look closely. "Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry. Not for dying, for not telling you sooner how dangerous things were. I thought I could fix it alone. I was wrong. You were always the stronger one. I just didn't want you to have to prove it. Daniel." She pressed the paper to her lips, closed her eyes. "I proved it," she whispered. "I hope you saw." Luke found her there at dawn. He stood in the barn doorway, hat in hand, and he didn't speak until she looked up. "Marshal Beck wants to see us," he said. "Both of us. Town Hall." "What time?" "Now." Margaret stood, brushed the hay from Daniel's trousers. She was still wearing them, still wearing his shirt, still carrying him against her skin because it was all she had left of a man who'd given her everything and been taken too soon. "Margaret." "Yeah." "You all right?" She looked at him, at the burns on his arms that were scabbing over, at the bandages on his hands that she'd wrapped herself, at the scar on his jaw that she'd kissed last night, once, quickly, before they'd settled into separate hay bales and pretended that the 4 feet between them still mattered. "I don't know what I am," she said, "but I'm standing. That's enough for now." They rode into town together, same as before, Luke on his mare, Margaret driving the wagon. But this time, nobody whispered, Nobody stared. Nobody turned away. Instead, Henry Patterson waved from his store. Dr. Whitaker tipped his hat from the porch of his office. Two women Margaret barely knew nodded as she passed, and one of them, a young mother with a baby on her hip, said, "Morning, Mrs. Callahan. God bless you." Margaret's throat tightened. She nodded back. Town Hall was full. Not crowded. Full. Every seat taken. People standing along the walls. Ranchers, shopkeepers, wives, children. The whole of Red Hollow packed into a room that smelled like dust and sweat and something Margaret couldn't name at first, but recognized a moment later. Shame. Collective shame. The kind that settles over a community when it realizes it watched a woman suffer and did nothing. The kind that doesn't lift until someone says it out loud. Marshal Beck stood at the front. Beside him was a man Margaret didn't recognize. Thin, sharp-featured, wearing a suit too clean for Wyoming. "Mrs. Callahan," Beck said. "Mr. Mercer, thank you for coming." Margaret sat in the front row. Luke stood behind her. She could feel him, not touching her, but close. A presence. A wall. "I'll get straight to it," Beck said. "Victor Crowley has made a full confession. In exchange for avoiding the gallows, he's detailed every illegal land acquisition, every act of arson, every bribery payment, and—" Beck paused. His voice dropped. "And the hiring of a man named Jonas Pike to murder Sheriff Daniel Callahan." The room gasped. Not everyone, some already knew, had heard through the trickle of truth that had been flowing through Red Hollow since the arrest. But hearing it spoken aloud, officially, by a federal marshal, turned suspicion into stone. Margaret didn't gasp. She sat still. She'd already cried for this, already raged for this, already kissed a man in a burning barn because of this. She had nothing left to give the shock except silence. "Jonas Pike," she said. "Where is he?" "Dead. Killed in a bar fight in Deadwood 4 months ago. There'll be no trial for the murder itself, but Crowley will face conspiracy charges in federal court, so no one answers for Daniel's death. Not directly." Beck met her eyes. "Crowley will spend the rest of his life in a federal prison. I know that's not the same as—" "No, it's not." Margaret's voice was steady, hard. The voice of a woman who'd learned that justice isn't a meal. It's a drink of water when you're dying of thirst. It keeps you alive, but it doesn't make you full. "However," Beck continued, "there's a second matter." He gestured to the man in the clean suit. "This is Arthur Wynne, Territorial Land Commissioner." Wynne stepped forward. He held a document like it was something fragile, something important. "Mrs. Callahan, the territorial government has reviewed the fraudulent land transfers orchestrated by Mr. Crowley over the past 3 years. 14 properties were illegally acquired. 7 families were displaced. 3 homes were destroyed." He paused. "Yours being the most recent." "I'm aware." "The governor has issued an executive order. All fraudulently acquired properties will be returned to their original owners or their surviving families. Restitution funds will be allocated from Crowley's seized assets for rebuilding and damages." Margaret blinked. "You're saying I get the land back?" "Ma'am, the land was always yours. The law just took a while to catch up." Something broke in her. Not apart. Open. Like a fist unclenching after months of gripping so tight the nails drew blood. She felt Luke's hand on her shoulder. Light, careful, asking permission with pressure instead of words. And she reached up and covered it with her own. "There's more," Wynne said. He opened the document. "The guardianship statute that required you to marry in order to retain your property?
the statute that started all of this, has been flagged for review by the territorial legislature. Your case, Mrs. Callahan, has been cited as evidence of its potential for abuse. Flagged for review isn't repealed. No, but it's a start. A start.
Margaret stood. She looked at the room, at every face that had watched her struggle, watched her burn, watched her marry a stranger to keep what was hers. A start would have been one of you standing up 6 months ago and saying this law was wrong. A start would have been one person, walking to my door after Daniel died and asking what I needed, instead of what I'd give up. The room was silent. I don't blame you, she said. Not anymore. Crowley made cowards of all of us, including me. I was too proud to ask for help. You were too scared to offer it. And the good man died because none of us were brave enough to do what he did every single day. Stand between the wolf and the flock. She paused, let the words settle. But I'm asking now, not for me, for every woman in this territory who's one dead husband away from losing everything she's built, for every widow who's been told her land isn't hers, for every mother who's been told she needs a man's name on a deed to matter. Her voice rose, not shouting, just filling the room. This law needs to change, not be reviewed, changed, and I intend to be the one who changes it. Rose Whitfield stood up, didn't say anything, just stood. Then Sarah Brennan, then Tom Harding, then Dr. Whitaker and Henry Patterson, and the young mother with the baby, and a man Margaret had never spoken to in her life, who owned the blacksmith shop and had tears running down his weathered face. One by one, like dominoes, like a congregation responding to a call. 30 people standing in a room that had been silent for years. Margaret looked at them and felt the full weight of what Daniel had believed, that people were good, that communities could heal, that the law was only as strong as the people willing to fight for it. She'd thought he was naive. He'd been right all along. Marshal Beck cleared his throat. Mrs. Callahan, I'll personally recommend your petition to the governor's office. And for what it's worth, he tipped his hat, your husband would be proud. I know, Margaret said. He always was. The meeting ended. People filed out slowly, stopping to touch Margaret's hand, to nod at Luke, to exchange glances that said more than words could. Something had shifted in Red Hollow. Not fixed, shifted, the way a bone shifts back into place after being broken. It still hurt, but it was starting to heal. Outside, Luke leaned against the wagon and watched her say goodbye to Rose Whitfield. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush, just waited the way he always did, patient, steady, taking up exactly the space she'd given him permission to fill. When Rose left, Margaret walked over and leaned against the wagon beside him, shoulder to shoulder. You know what Daniel would say right now? She said. What? He'd say, Maggie, you just gave a speech to 30 people in your husband's old trousers. You might want to buy a dress. Luke laughed. Margaret froze. She'd never heard him laugh. Not once. Not a chuckle, not a half smile, not even the ghost of amusement she'd seen cross his face in the general store. This was a real laugh. Short, rough, surprised out of him like a cough, and it changed his entire face. Opened it, made him look younger, made him look like the man he might have been if the world hadn't put 30 lashes on his back and 11 graves in his conscience. That's the first time I've heard you do that, she said. It's the first time I've done that in a long time. How long? He thought about it. Before the war. That's too long. I know. She nudged his shoulder with hers. I'm going to make it my mission to fix that. Fair warning. Consider me warned. They rode back to the ranch in a silence that had nothing to do with walls or distance or the careful choreography of strangers. This was the silence of two people who had said the hard things and survived them. The comfortable, lived-in silence of trust. The barn was waiting. The cattle were grazing. The well was clean. And by the fence post nearest the road, someone had left a bundle. Margaret climbed down and unwrapped it. Inside, a loaf of bread, a jar of preserves, a patchwork quilt, and a note. From your neighbors, we should have done this months ago. Margaret held the quilt against her chest and let 2 tears fall. Just 2. Then she wiped her face and carried everything inside. Luke was already working. He'd pulled lumber from the hay shed, planks that had been stored for fence repairs, and he was measuring, marking, cutting, building something. "What are you doing?" Margaret asked. "Starting the house." "Luke, we don't have enough lumber for a house." "We've got enough for a floor. A floor is a start." "You and your starts." "A floor, then walls, then a roof. One thing at a time." She watched him work, watched the way his burned hands gripped the saw, the way his shoulders flexed beneath the shirt she'd patched with thread from the barn. He worked the way he did everything, methodically, thoroughly, as if the act of building something could undo the years he'd spent tearing things apart. "Luke," he looked up, "I want to show you something." She led him to the spot behind the barn where Daniel was buried. She'd dug the grave herself, wouldn't let anyone else do it, and she'd marked it with a wooden cross she'd carved with his initials. She hadn't been back since the funeral. Luke took his hat off, held it against his chest. Margaret knelt beside the grave, pressed her hand flat against the dirt. "Daniel," she said, "I found your letters, both of them, and the evidence. And I want you to know, Crowley's done. It's over. The marshal came and the town stood up, and your case, your fight, it's finished." She paused, breathed. "I also want you to know about Luke. I know you sent him. I know you trusted him. And I want you to know that you were right. He's a good man, better than he believes, better than this town deserved." Her voice cracked. She let it. "And I love him, Daniel. Not the way I loved you. Nothing will ever be the way I loved you. But in a way that's real and earned and honest. And I hope, you'd want that for me." She stood, wiped her face with the back of her hand. Luke was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Not blank, not guarded. Something wide open and raw and unprotected, like a man who'd just watched someone give him permission to exist. "Did you mean that?" he said. His voice was rough, rougher than usual. "What you said? About loving me?" "I don't say things I don't mean, Luke. Not anymore. Not after everything. You've known me 3 weeks. I've known you longer than that. I knew you when you walked into that courthouse and offered to marry a stranger because a dead man asked you to. I knew you when you fixed my fences without being asked. I knew you when you told me about Colonel Briggs and the whipping and the settlement you couldn't save." She stepped closer. "And I knew you when you pulled me through a window with your bare hands and bled all over my kitchen floor. I don't need years, Luke. I need truth. And you've given me more truth in 3 weeks than most people give in a lifetime." He put his hat on, took it off, put it back on. She'd never seen him nervous. The man who'd faced down 3 riders and shot a hat off a man's head at full gallop was nervous because a woman said she loved him. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Do what?" "Be someone's... be yours. I know how to track a man across a desert. I know how to survive on nothing for weeks. I know how to kill, and I know how to build, and I know how to follow orders. but I don't know how to be a husband. A real one. Not a legal arrangement. Not a guardian on a piece of paper. A husband. Margaret took his hand, the bandaged one, held it between both of hers. You learn. Same way I learned to run a ranch after Daniel died. Same way I learned to stand in a courthouse and not break. Same way you learned to walk into a fire. She squeezed. You just do it. And when you get it wrong, you try again. And when you get it right, you hold on. What if I hurt you? You won't. You can't know that. I can. Because the men who hurt people don't worry about hurting people. They just do it. The fact that you're standing here asking me that question is the answer to that question. He closed his eyes. She watched his jaw work, watched the muscles in his throat tighten and release, watched a man who had carried 11 dead men and 30 lashes and the weight of a name he'd never chosen finally set something down. Okay, he said. Okay? Okay. I'll learn. I'll try. I'll get it wrong and I'll try again. He opened his eyes. But Margaret, yeah? I need you to know one thing that's true, that I've never said to another living person, and that I need to say before I lose the nerve. Say it. I love you. Not because Daniel asked me to protect you, not because the law put us together, not because you're brave or strong or beautiful, though you're all three. He held her gaze. I love you because when I'm with you, the voices stop. The ones that tell me what I am. The ones that count the dead. When I'm with you, there's quiet. And I've been looking for quiet my whole life. Margaret kissed him. Slow, deliberate. The kind of kiss that isn't about passion or fire or the desperate collision of two people in crisis. The kind that says, I'm here. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Not for a night, not for a season, for the rest of whatever time God gives us on this prairie. He held her like she was the last solid thing in a world that had been trying to knock him off his feet for 34 years. She held him like he was the answer to a question she'd been asking since the day she buried her husband and stood at the edge of an empty future and wondered if there was anything left worth fighting for. There was. There is. There always had been. 3 months later, the house was finished. Not rebuilt, built new. Bigger than the original. 2 bedrooms instead of 1, because Margaret had plans she hadn't told Luke about yet, but that he'd probably figured out from the way she'd been sick every morning for the past 2 weeks, and the way Dr. Whitaker had smiled at her during her last visit and said, "Congratulations, Mrs. Callahan." She hadn't corrected him that time, but she'd gone home and sat on the new porch, the porch Luke had built with his own hands and the hands of 12 neighbors who'd showed up one Saturday morning with lumber and nails and the kind of apologetic helpfulness that comes after a community has faced its own failure. And she'd looked out at the land that was hers, legally, officially, with her name on the deed and no man's guardianship required. The territorial legislature had repealed the statute. Not reviewed, repealed. Margaret's testimony, delivered in Cheyenne in front of 14 lawmakers and a gallery full of women who traveled from every corner of Wyoming, had been the deciding vote. She'd worn a dress that day, blue cotton from Patterson's store. Luke had said she looked beautiful. She'd said he looked terrified. He'd said he was, but not of the legislature. Of the 50 women in the gallery who kept looking at him like he was some kind of hero. I ain't a hero, he'd said. You married a widow to save her land, pulled her out of a fire, outran 3 gunmen, and helped bring down the most powerful man in the territory. What would you call that? Tuesday. She'd laughed. He'd smiled. Not the half-twitch from the general store, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and stayed there. Luke had received a letter from the governor the previous week, an official acknowledgement of service. Not a medal, not a title, just a piece of paper that said the territory of Wyoming recognized Luke Mercer as a man of honor and a citizen in good standing. He'd read it once, folded it, put it in his coat pocket next to Daniel's letters. "You keeping all of those?" Margaret had asked. "I keep the things that matter." "That pocket's going to get crowded." "I'll manage." Now she sat on the porch, watching the sun go down, and she listened to Luke inside the house. Their house, hanging a shelf she'd asked for 3 times, and he'd pretended to forget because he'd been busy building a cradle in the barn when he thought she wasn't looking. She knew about the cradle. She'd seen it yesterday. Pine wood, hand-sanded, with small horses carved into the headboard. She'd stood in the barn doorway and watched him work on it, and she'd pressed her hand to her stomach and thought, "Daniel, you should see this. The man you sent me is building a bed for a child he doesn't know about yet." Or maybe he did know. Luke noticed everything. The morning sickness, the way she'd stopped drinking coffee, the way her hand drifted to her stomach when she thought no one was watching. He probably knew. He was just waiting for her to tell him. "Luke," she called. His footsteps crossed the house. He appeared in the doorway, sawdust in his hair, a hammer in his hand. "Yeah? Come sit with me." He set the hammer down, walked out, sat beside her, not on the far end of the steps, right beside her, shoulder to shoulder. No distance, no deliberate space, just 2 people who'd earned the right to be close. Margaret took his hand. The scars from the window glass had healed into thin white lines across his palms. She traced one with her finger. "I have something to tell you." "I know." She looked at him. "You know?" "Margaret, I've tracked men across 3 territories. You think I can't tell when a woman stops drinking coffee and starts crying at sunsets?" "I don't cry at sunsets." "You cried yesterday, and the day before." "Those weren't tears. That was allergies." "In July, in Wyoming, allergies." She laughed. It came out wet and broken and beautiful, and he pulled her against his side and held her there. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Terrified." "Good. Me too." "I don't know anything about babies." "You didn't know anything about being a husband either. You figured it out." "I'm still figuring it out." "You're doing fine." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Daniel would have been a good father." Margaret's heart clenched. Not from pain, from the bittersweet, aching tenderness of hearing this man, this scarred, feared, redeemed, beautiful man, honor the ghost that still lived between them. "He would have," she said, "and so will you." "How do you know?" "Because good fathers are just good men who show up. And Luke Mercer, you have never once failed to show up." He pressed his lips to her hair, held them there. "I'll build a bigger porch," he said. "Why?" "Because I reckon a child's going to need room to run." She smiled, leaned into him, felt his heartbeat through his shirt, steady, strong, the heartbeat of a man who had walked through fire and come out on the other side and found, against every expectation, against every story ever told about him, that he was capable of something more than violence. He was capable of love. And Margaret Callahan, widow, rancher, fighter, wife, mother, sat on the porch of a house built from ashes and lumber, and the stubborn, unbreakable refusal to let the wolves win. And she watched the sun set over a prairie that was no longer silent, no longer empty, no longer waiting. It was full of the sound of hammering from inside the house, full of cattle lowing in the south pasture, full of wind moving through grass that had survived the worst summer in Wyoming history and was still growing,
full of a man's quiet breathing beside her, full of a child's heartbeat beneath hers, full of a future that nobody had given her, that she had earned and fought for and bled for and chosen. In a land where women were called property and men were judged by blood, Margaret Callahan chose her own name, kept her own land, and loved a man the world said she should fear. And Luke Mercer, the butcher of Silver Creek, the outlaw, the ghost, with 11 graves and 30 scars, chose to be something the world never expected. A husband, a father, a man who built things instead of breaking them. And the prairie burned, not with fire, not with destruction, with life.